Welcome back. Today's episode is one you're going to want to share with your entire marketing team because we're diving into a fascinating and often misunderstood topic: how understanding your customers' worldviews, not politics, can help you better connect with them, avoid alienation, and drive growth. My guest is Chris Peterson, co founder of LifeMind AI and author of Red and Blue Customers: How to Drive Growth and Manage Risk in Today's Conservative and Liberal Markets. Chris brings years of research into how values, liberal or conservative, shape customer decisions and how brands can apply this insight without taking a political stance. If you've ever wondered how the heck to align your messaging with your audience's deeper beliefs, or if staying neutral is really the safest path for your brand, this conversation is going to give you a fresh, practical perspective. And I honestly think after this conversation that Chris's book, Red and Blue Customers, should be a must read for all marketing teams. Welcome to Marketing with Empathy, the podcast for brands that want to target and engage moms. Moms influence or control 85% of all household purchases and impact so many other industry purchasing decisions, making them an extremely lucrative market to figure out. But many brands struggle to connect with moms through their content, which means they're missing out on leads and sales. Moms might be your only audience or one of several audiences that you're trying to sell to. And if that's the case, this is the right podcast for you. I'm your host, Sarah Panus, and I have more than 20 years of experience helping brands of all sizes, including Sleep Number, SheFit, Starbucks, LegalZoom, JHL Turf Pros, and more. So tune in here for ideas that'll get your products and services into the hands of more moms who need them, so your brand can effectively reach those moms and drive those all-important leads and sales. And thanks to your support, this podcast is in the top 5% of all podcasts and a proud member of the Marketing Podcast Network. So let's hear from today's sponsors and then jump right into my discussion with Chris Peterson and what we should know as we think about red versus blue customers. Chris, I want to start first by the topic of red and blue. A lot of times people and brands and companies, and I was in this boat too when I worked in corporate, which was let's stay neutral, let's not pick a side, then we won't get into trouble. And I still kind of have that feeling. And so you may convince me otherwise as we're talking, but to start, how can businesses apply these insights you're going to be sharing with us about red and blue, just that topic of alienation? Like, how do we think about this without alienating one side or the other?
Yeah, so the topic is red and blue, but what it speaks to is something more profound, which is a customer's worldview. And a worldview is defined as a set of values, and those values tend to either be a bit more liberal or a bit more conservative. So think of a customer's values as something they live with every day, what they believe to be true, and politics is an expression of those values, but it's not the value. So, like, I think what's interesting is today is that people think that politics drives polarization and values, but it's the other way around. Actually, the market has sorted itself into two different groups over the last 50 years. A lot of research on this. There really isn't anyone in the middle anymore. You can certainly be moderate, but there really isn't anyone in the middle. So when it comes to the question of alienation, as long as you're sticking to values that are not controversial at all, and we'll talk about some in a bit, then you stay out of the fray. You stay out of being thought of as playing in politics. And it's really quite easy. And the other thing I want to bring up is there's no such thing as neutrality. And this was a really interesting insight that came out of the research, which was brands assume that if you don't participate in politics outwardly to your market, you are therefore neutral. It's absolutely not the case. In every company we've evaluated, communications has either leaned liberal or conservative, markets lean liberal or conservative. So there's some really big decisions to be made around what is the right fit for our brand, what is the right fit for our marketing. And it can all be done without any controversy, without any alienation, as long as you stick to the worldview and values and not politicians and policy and voting.
Got it. If we do acknowledge these differences, does that risk deepening the political division that's happening? And I'm thinking what you're going to say is no, as long as we stick to the worldview and values, it won't, or will it?
Yeah, so that's right. If you stick to the worldview, but here's the interesting effect is that if there's misalignment, let's say you project liberal values in your communications and your communications are landing on a conservative audience, the conservative audience doesn't get angry. It just fades into the background. And that's the risk. Okay. The risk is that you're projecting a worldview that doesn't align with somebody, and therefore it doesn't feel like a fit for them. And marketing, in my mind, is all about how do you create the best fit between the brand and the product and the customer to make it feel like it belongs in their life. Well, the best way to do that after doing all this research for the book is to look through the eyes of the customer, recognize that the world is pluralistic, that the market is made up of lots of different types of people who have different sets of values, and then in a non judgmental manner, align your communications to those people that make the most sense for growing your business. Now, that assumes you can be a bit flexible with how you project your business onto the market. Some companies will say, well, our values are our values, and we're just going to stick with that. And that's fine. My message in the book is to just be intentional and think about it, put it on the table in a dispassionate way. And in the process, learn about both sides in a deeper way as markets, and as an offshoot, learn about them for personal purposes as well.
So, what are some of those key values then that drive purchasing decisions for conservative and for liberal customers as we think about values instead of politics? What's the difference between the
Yeah.
two, would you say?
So the book outlines 20 categories, and I'll read through some. There are 20 that distinguish the two groups and seven that unite the two groups. And we can talk about those too, which are effectively American values. Okay. And so the ones that distinguish, like I'll rattle off some of the categories, then I'll get into the differences. Perceptions of the future, change boundaries, self moderation, self image, thought styles, influences, empathy, fear and safety, success, what it means to win, good and evil, trust, compassion and loyalty. And there are more. Okay, so you can tell that like nothing I just said is political or controversial, right? So now let's dive into a couple of these. And all of these are based on hundreds of research studies in social psychology, social anthropology, and cultural geography. So make any of this up. I did the work of plowing through hundreds of studies and pulled this out. It was just sitting there. And I was just amazed that this hasn't been used in communications before. There are a couple of easy ones that'll make perfect sense, like perceptions of the future and change are big themes that are easy to understand. For liberal customers, the present is not acceptable, okay? It needs fixing. So there's a desire to re-engineer and experiment to create a better future. Now, that sounds theoretical, but you can put it in the context of a new innovative product that is doing something dramatically new. And liberal customers are the early adopters. Okay. There's not a lot of debate about this. Okay.
Okay.
On the flip side, with conservative customers, the present is more acceptable. There's less reason to change it. There's a desire to maintain it. And as a result, the future is more known. There's more comfort level with the future. Now, this is quite broadly, right? You could come up with to this, right? The intent here is to come up with underlying themes in markets that explain trends in large groups of people. It does not explain every individual. Believe me, there will be people saying, well, I'm not like this or I'm not like that. But just that distinction has huge implications in new product launches that might be very innovative. Okay. Change boundaries is related to that. There's a lot of research around how liberals, and I extrapolate it to customers, have wider change boundaries. It's this desire to experiment. Whereas conservative customers, the change boundary is a bit more restricted. Doesn't mean they won't try new things, but they want to see something proven and reliable first in general. Again, there are going to be exceptions. But like if you look at Apple as an example, Apple's a very innovative company, creates great products, Their brand is really quite liberal, but their products are proven and tested over time. And what you find is that conservative customers buy a lot of Apple products. Yet at the same time, what's interesting to me is that the retail footprint for Apple is 90% in liberal areas. It's almost like they're missing an opportunity to expand their retail into areas that aren't so heavily liberal. So that's one example. Another one that gets more interesting in terms of how you create communications, self-moderation. So liberal customers have a far stronger desire for self-expression, and conservative customers have a stronger desire for self-control. So when you see ads portraying customers leaping in the air, high-fiving each other, and being extremely self-expressive, it was probably created by a liberal creative team. And people are going to pick up that those people are more liberal because there's super interesting research that was actually published in the New York Times, I think about 10 years ago, that showed that people have an intuitive sense whether someone is conservative or liberal. They can kind of, with pretty good accuracy, they can tell. And so this is happening in communication. So these signals happening, right? And so what's happening is none of it's making anyone mad. Like, for example, the like Dodge Ram truck ads don't make liberals mad. The Mini Cooper ads don't make conservatives mad. Yet those two brands align very strongly with either liberals or conservatives.
Sure.
And but it's this sense of creating a tailwind or a headwind in your communications. As long as you know, are your customers more liberal or conservative, and is your market more liberal or conservative? Another one I think is interesting is thought styles. Multiple studies showing that liberals are going to have a more wide-ranging set of inputs to make a decision and want to get to an aha moment. Conservative customers are going to want something a little bit more methodical and incremental to reach a decision. Okay. That's a little bit more complex in terms of how you weave it into marketing and advertising. But it's one of these interesting distinctions that if you're aware of it, you can pick up on certain things that you or your teams might be doing that might align or not align with the market that you want.
I'm curious, since this is marketing with empathy, what is the empathy difference?
The empathy one is interesting. So there's a guy in Northwestern who won awards for his research on empathy between the two groups. And so this probably won't sound surprising, but liberal, and I extrapolate the liberal customers, are empathy for larger groups of people and less familiar people. And there can be a sense of like more empathy, possibly, again, there are exceptions, versus family. Okay.
More empathy for friends versus family.
Yeah. So like they both have empathy. That's the key. The research talks about it as they have different empathy targets, which is kind of a funny word. And so conservative customers have more empathy for smaller groups with perceived hierarchy, family over friends, country, anything that's a bit hierarchical, they will have more empathy for. Okay. Now, one of the funny offshoots of the research was that they also discovered that liberals, their empathy for wider circles extended so far, they proved that liberal customers will have more empathy for non-human life forms, including aliens and rocks. Okay. So I know that sounds a little, but it's kind of funny. But now let's put empathy in the context of marketing and your customers, right? How you show different groups of people and who you choose to show in your communications becomes kind of interesting. If you're showing a lot of friends hanging out versus a family setting, it's not going to have a dramatic effect on performance, but all of these things can really add up. Okay. Are you trying to go after both groups at the same time? Are you trying to go after more one group than the other? And all of those strategies can be good. There is no bad strategy.
Yeah. As marketers, we always want to think about the words we're using and also the visuals. So this is just another element that we think about as we're thinking about those words and those visuals to those audiences. Okay, so if someone's listening right now and they're like, well, I don't know which way my audience leans.
Yeah.
What are some simple ways brands can understand which way their audience leans, if they're more liberal, more conservative, or both?
Yeah, no one knows. Honestly, I've worked in marketing for decades. I didn't know. There are a couple of steps. One is you first want to understand, well, what about my customers? Okay. Do they lean more liberal or conservative? And in all the data we've looked at, we've seen a couple cases where there were slight skews one way or the other, but there have been a lot that were very large skews. And I don't mean far left or far right. There's just more liberals than conservatives, or more conservatives than liberals. And we're actually working with two companies right now where one has overwhelmingly liberal customers, one has overwhelmingly conservative customers. One's in the fitness space, and one is a very well-known large mobile app. And the way you figure it out, there's a bunch of different ways. Okay. If you house your customer data in some form of software, sometimes you can just run a report that'll tell you, because the software companies often sell their services to political campaigns. And buried in some report, it might actually tell you if it leans one way or the other, but it might be buried. I once looked at a database readout for a women's shoe company that on the face of it looked extremely liberal for a variety of reasons. And they had 3 retail locations, Seattle, New York, and San Francisco. So very liberal retail footprint.
Mm-hmm.
Someone gave me the report, and the report had a summary that talked about basic demographics: skewed higher income, they live in these areas, they have these habits. But then down in the corner, it wasn't even included in the summary, was the fact that these customers skewed pretty strongly conservative, which was kind of contrary to the image being projected and the retail footprint. And I immediately looked at that and I'm like, God, that's interesting. And what an opportunity to do some testing in terms of like, is that really our market? And because that could be an opportunity. So anyway, to figure out if your customers are liberal or conservative, you can look at a database report. You can run a simple survey. You can just ask them, right? You can, and the way you ask them is you don't give them an option to say I'm in the middle, because everyone will pick that. And there's very few people in the middle. So you can't make it easy. So the way you word it, it's non-controversial. You say, yeah, I'm conservative, or I'm a bit conservative, 2 different answers, or I'm liberal, or I'm a bit liberal. You soften it, and then you just combine the answers to the 2 pairs of answers. And it's super easy. You can tack it on to any customer survey that you're running. And by the way, if an organization is big enough to be running brand studies, like for awareness and consideration, it's so easy to add that question and to then look at, are my awareness and consideration levels higher or lower between the 2 groups? And I guarantee you, if your market is strongly one or the other, their awareness and consideration will be significantly higher. And basically what the current result is just going to average those 2. And so that can also point to opportunity. And then other options, you look for urbanicity of customers. That means if they're more urban, they're more liberal. You can look at related to that population density. Liberals live in higher density population areas, urban centers, inner suburbs. It's kind of the classic suburbs where the 2 are mixed. But then as you get to the exurbs and rural, it's definitely more conservative. Now, there are exceptions. As a rule, it's pretty strong. So.
It's so great for us to think about, because I know when I do content marketing plans for clients that I work with, because I do content strategy consulting in addition to this podcast, I always try to get those insights as we're listening to who your customer is, like trying to understand their political leanings. Are they more conservative or more liberal? It's really easy too if you're focused on a specific local geography, because then you can look at census data and things like that for those areas to get reports on who's living in those communities. Okay, then I'm curious, are there any areas where both groups are aligned, or is everything polarized?
Yeah, one thing I'll make a comment about these distinctions in values. I think some of your listeners will be saying, well, I like reliable things too, but I'm a liberal person. You have to think of these values as living within each person to varying degrees. They're not mutually exclusive. I won't get into it. My theory is that digital culture has kind of caused us to think it's either one or the other, and it's not some more analog mix of the 2. But from a market perspective, the trends are clear. So the similarities, which are, I think, wonderful things to tap into because they're so safe to tap into, they come from our own research into American values. And the way we did that was we looked at 40 or 50 articles written by businesses and educational institutions who were writing articles to prepare people from outside the US what to expect when they come to America. Okay. And the overlap in advice and characterization of Americans was phenomenal. And so we derived 7 similarities, and I'll just read them off to you. And these won't be a big surprise, but you can think of these as American values, and you can think of them as related to also the American dream. And you can argue whether the American dream is alive or dead. The polling shows that strong majority of Americans still believe in the American dream. But the shared values are independence and self-determination, competition, productivity, right? Because Americans are just obsessed with productivity. Everyone looks at us and says, relax. Ingenuity is an interesting one. And I think it's interesting because it's different from innovation. Okay. Disruptive innovation will lean toward a more liberal customer, but ingenuity is about solving a problem in a clever way. And you could take a piece of technology or something innovative and frame it as using ingenuity in order to appeal to everyone. I think that's a really interesting one. Directness, of course, Americans are known to be direct. Underdog, we root for the underdog. So portraying a brand or a product as like an underdog is a great way to sell to Americans. And then friendliness and informality is another one. And so just projecting friendliness and informality, it's so easy, right? I think a lot of brands already do it, but you just don't want to go crazy with it, like the example I cited before, where everybody is just leaping in the air because they have a new home insurance policy.
So then industry specific, is there any nuances and differences with types of industries where this is particularly relevant or ones where maybe it matters less?
I've yet to come across an industry where it doesn't matter. And I think what we see within specific industries is different types of products that appeal to the different groups. Okay, so let's take an example of fitness or exercise equipment. All right. I've worked with a fair number of fitness brands in the past, and we ended up running a small research study to understand how liberal and conservative customers think about exercise. And the interesting thing about the fitness industry is that it's huge. And one reason it's huge is because the liberals and conservatives, everyone likes to exercise in the US, okay? It's one of these great markets because both groups are participating. But the research showed that conservative customers were twice as likely to be interested in a product that was about strength over fitness, and liberal customers were twice as likely to be attracted to a product that was more about fitness versus strength. Now, that speaks to the product. It's not like you can take a piece of fitness gear and market it two totally different ways. It's like the Peloton is a fitness product generally. There's a company we work with, Total Gym, which is a strength product. It's like a home kind of cable weights type of thing, a very interesting product. And they will have totally different customers, even though they operate in what is perceived as the same industry. So they don't compete. That's the other interesting part of this, right? You can figure out a strategy in all of this where your product doesn't necessarily have to compete with everyone else if you can carve out a target audience that they are not going after.
Gotcha. So interesting. And everything we're talking about so far, do you explain more about this in your book, Red and Blue Customers?
Yes, yeah. So the book is divided up into three sections. The business case, which is basically saying, look, here's just a sampling of the research. It shows you got to pay attention to this because otherwise you're relying on luck. The middle section is all the values detailed, all the research sources cited, and with examples of how to apply them in business. And the third section is how you take all this information and apply it specifically to your business. Every year, Harris, the people behind the Harris poll, study of the brands with the most trust with liberal and conservative customers and rank the top 15. And every time they do this, there's only two or three brands that are on both lists. One of them is typically Patagonia as an interesting one. But otherwise, the brands that are different, like Target, Toyota, IBM, Nike, and Honda, are on the liberal side. Now, international brands will generally be more aligned with the liberal customer. And then on the conservative side, you have Home Depot, General Motors, USAA, domestic brands, and then also USAA is an insurance company marketing to military families. Those are always interesting distinctions. And I think maybe the big surprise is really that this goes way beyond thinking about who watches Fox News versus MSNBC or CNN. It goes way beyond that. And even in television consumption, we've done a lot of studies for brands around television media plans, and the shows How to Get Away with Murder, Modern Family, Doctor Who, Outlander, Game of Thrones are overwhelmingly watched by liberal customers. SEAL Team, Last Man Standing, New Amsterdam, Chicago Fire, and The Good Doctor are overwhelmingly watched by conservative customers. Now, the interesting thing is that the media planners who place advertising, they don't look at this. And the point is, let's put this on the table. Let's put it on the table in a dispassionate way that we can all talk about it intentionally without getting any politics into it. And I think when that happens, interesting things happen. Like you end up learning about the other side, whatever side that is. The other side becomes less mysterious. And it just becomes an interesting exercise in driving growth for a business. And I've only seen it have positive effects. It's not like it starts a lot of arguments.
Good, because none of us want that. We've had enough of that. We see it happening to the point where sometimes you get scared to even bring something up. But this is such a
Right.
great way to talk about it in a way that's not going to deepen that political division, because it's politics aside, it's looking at their values and what they lean towards and how your products and services can speak to those customers more, and understanding that, which is a nice reframe. I think it's a breath of fresh
Yeah.
air of how we think about this. In your book, you've talked about a worldview brief.
Yes.
What is that?
Yeah. So the worldview brief is a simple document that's outlined in the book. It's the first step. It's ideally just like one page. And what it does is it summarizes any findings around, do my customers lean liberal or conservative after doing some exploration? Does my market lean liberal or conservative after doing some exploration? And sometimes you can't get perfect answers. You just have to look at what's available. Um, and then an initial run at what makes the most sense for our business. Do we want a competitive strategy? Do we want to align with one or the other? Do we want to align with both? But I have to say, even though there's an inclination to align with both, to be safe, to be neutral, they're both amazing markets. They're both huge. They have equal spending power. If they were countries, they would be tied for the 10th largest country in the world. They're both great markets. So this idea that you need both is crazy. So then you put all that information on a page, and what that helps is help frame up a possible strategy. Then the next step is to develop a list of values that make sense for your business. So I rattled off a whole bunch of them, right? Some of them will make sense for someone's business and some won't. If I'm an insurance company, the distinctions around fear and safety will probably resonate with me, right? And if I'm developing technology or I'm an innovative startup, then these perceptions of the future and change are going to be more interesting to me. So the 20 categories of values are meant to be like a menu that you choose from and you say, okay, these 5 seem to make sense for the strategy that I want to implement. So let's keep an eye on these. Let's maybe start to weave these into our communications. And then the final part is really, okay, now how do we apply it to our marketing? It can influence product development. It can influence distribution strategy. I've looked at like the Miele vacuum cleaner, which is very kind of modernist, slick vacuum cleaner from Europe. It's a very good vacuum cleaner. It's sold at Walmart, which has more conservative customers. And if you search for it on the website, it's down at the bottom of the list. It's almost like it's like the wrong. First of all, you want to be in Walmart regardless, right? Like, you wouldn't say no to Walmart, but it can help guide toward distribution strategies. Obviously, like a food chain like Whole Foods is going to lean one way or the other. Target's an interesting example because they're so big, they have a footprint across both, but it leans liberal and their brand leans liberal. So it can affect things like that as well. And so it becomes an interesting filter, and it doesn't cost anything to think this way. It's just an added input to strategy, an added input to what you already know about your customers. It doesn't mean throwing out what you already know. It's just another interesting layer.
And that one pager you said is outlined in the books, and
Yes.
along with those list of 20 different values, so people could easily go through it individually or as a team and kind of align on and pick out those pieces to help improve their plans. Since we talk about helping brands better reach more mom customers, is there anything that relates more to moms that we should be aware of from your research? Moms or women in
Well,
general?
I mean, there's this notion that women are a lot more liberal than men, and it's barely true. It's not a huge difference, and I think it's a mistake it would be a mistake for someone to say that, oh, we have a liberal audience because we sell to moms. It's just that would be from the voting data. There's about a 10-point difference. You could use that as a signal. But while that might matter in voting, when you look at markets, it's not that big a deal because you're still ending up with very large audiences. I think when it comes to worldview, you're going to find some nuances between the two genders. But in the end, it's just going to take some testing. And one of the great things about this kind of work is you don't have to go all in on anything to test this, right? You can use digital media to set up some A/B tests. You can try some different approaches with social media. You can do it with search. Because actually identifying the two audiences is dead simple because it's geographic. So it's not that hard to execute.
I know you have a freebie to offer to all of my listeners to help them think about a region or an area that do they lean conservative or liberal? Do you want to talk about that?
If someone wants to know if their customers are more liberal or conservative and they don't have an immediate answer, we'll actually run the analysis for free. And we'll do it. I'm a co-founder of this company called LifeMind AI, and we're in the middle of building a platform that helps automate a lot of this and uses AI. All we need is a customer account by zip code to run this. We're more than happy to do it for free. It's not a gimmick. You don't have to set up an account. It's not a free trial. You'll see the page, and the page is at lifemind.ai/empathy. And if you go there, you'll see exactly what we need to do it. It's pretty simple. And we're interested in seeing what kind of companies want to understand the distinctions. For us, it's just a bit of research on our part. We're more than happy to do that and even answer some questions about even what to do with it. Because this is very new. It's like in front of us every day, and yet it hasn't really been put on the table from a business perspective. And I personally find that pretty exciting because it's not that often you get something like new, big customer insights every day.
Very generous. Thank you so much. So I'll put that here in the show notes description as well. And then tell us about your book. So the book is called, again, for anyone who missed it, it's Red and Blue Customers, How to Drive Growth and Manage Risk in Today's Conservative and Liberal Markets. What's the best places to go and find it? And anything else you want to say about the book?
Probably the best place to get it right now is on Amazon. It's getting wider distribution over time. It's on Barnes and Noble. And one of the most interesting pieces of reaction to it is I've got readers telling me that after reading it, it's not only changed how they think about markets, it's changed them a bit personally. And I find that incredibly gratifying because it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about learning more about both sides. We don't have much incentive to learn about the other side, whatever side that is, whether you're liberal or conservative. But what about business growth? What about meeting business objectives? That's a good incentive to learn about both groups in a deeper way. And the collateral benefit of all that is, I can only describe it as like this calming effect, because the mystery of people starts to get removed.
Let's recap. I love how Chris reframes this conversation away from politics and toward those values. So showing us how brands can be intentional and empathetic in how you connect with customers. So be sure to check out Chris's book, Red and Blue Customers, which, as I mentioned before, should be required reading for any marketing team. You'll find his list of 20 values, the worldview brief template, and real world examples to help you apply this to your own business. I'll link to the book and his free offer at lifemind.ai/empathy in the show notes. If this episode sparked new ideas for your content strategy or gave you kind of that aha moment on how to better connect with moms and other key audiences that you're marketing to, please share this with your team or another marketer who could benefit.